Welcome back, everyone, to Joshua's Magic, a channel about how the ordinary world and the spiritual world intersect. Today, we're going to be talking with Don Lofendale about the men's rights movement and men's rights issues. Don is a retired lawyer for how many years?
Oh, let me see now. A ballpark, let's say 36.
36 years in Canada and also a men's rights activist. Now, you haven't really done any men's rights lawyering. Those are kind of
No,
separate things. Yeah.
yes.
All right. Well, yeah, this will be a kind of new topic to probably a lot of people tuning into this. Maybe not all. What is the men's rights movement for people that don't know that term?
Well, there's a real question as to whether or not it exists as a movement because it's pretty sparsely populated. But what it is in general is that something along the lines of a response to the change from traditionalism that was brought about by the women's movement. Men have never really reacted to that or adjusted to it or made counterclaims in any meaningful or meaningful, organized, or sustained way. And that's crucial because, for example, men traditionally have been considered to be the breadwinners of the family. That was something that women expected and required. What's happened now, the last 50 years, is that women are getting to be pretty much 50% of all the traditionally male professional jobs, yet still want most women still want men to be the primary breadwinner. Well, you can't do that if a woman has that job. Uh, Similarly, there presumably, I know feminists and even other women would say that there was a bias. Um, they would say against women, but a bias or expectation that women raise kids. Well, now that they're in the workplace full time, they don't devote themselves to child rearing. But yet we haven't changed the bias in favor of female child custody, mother child custody. So there are huge areas. Those are just maybe two of the more fundamental and obvious examples where there needs to be some response to the changes that have occurred from traditionalism to the modern world.
So it sounds like there's sort of two streams. Like first you talked about a thing that's more cultural with the changes of women being in the workplace and what women and men are expecting from the other in a relationship or a marriage or what have you. And then the other thing that you alluded to in the second part was the legal issues, which would be like actually rights, whereas the other thing aren't exactly rights, but they're sort of connected with some of the legal things also.
Exactly
So
right.
is that
It's
correct that the men's rights movement isn't just about legal issues, it's also sort of about cultural issues?
Yes, it's about cultural expectations between the sexes as well. Absolutely. The two do kind of, if not merge, they touch each other at times, the cultural and the legal, but you're absolutely right. It's both.
So let's start with the legal. What are some of the major legal or rights issues that men have that are, I guess, unique to men, right? Because otherwise they'd be human rights issues, right?
Yes. Well, actually, they are legion, but probably, and I don't want to short shrift the others, but probably the single most fundamental one, the most screamingly obvious one, is child custody. Uh, I guess the first point is that now that women don't devote themselves to child rearing anymore, that's not their primary function within a family. They overwhelmingly work outside the home full time. The reason for a pro-mother custody bias seems to be gone, but there's been no adjustment to the law. Worse, as we move to no fault divorce, uh, women who institute somewhere between about 70 to 90% of the divorces um, don't really need a reason, like not a compelling reason to end a marriage. And it does seem to be sometimes done for reasons that aren't the most substantial, like not because someone's being beaten, or not because a husband is an alcoholic.
Or
I
cheating or
think,
something.
yeah, or adultery, right? That's a good one to mention as well. But in the states where it can be listed as a uh, ground for divorce, the most often given reason is dissatisfaction.
Hmm.
So, and then in law, that I think, gets called irreconcilable differences, but doesn't have to be much at all. So that's um, a problem, that the law hasn't changed. Women are, or there are more divorces, mostly instituted by females. And then on top of that, at least in Canada, all a woman needs to take the couple's children out of the jurisdiction upon divorce is a plan. So the courts don't do a careful balancing on whether or not the kids would be better off to be in the same city as their dad, which would overwhelmingly be the case most often, but rather, does the woman have a plan? So there was some woman who decided that the only thing she wanted to do was uh, for for work going forward, required her to take a course that was only taught in Australia. So she moved her kids literally to the other side of the world, away from the kid's dad, and good enough for the courts because she had a plan. So very low standard to these things. So moms get the kids even though they don't devote themselves to child rearing. Very easy divorce. Can move the kids anywhere pretty much, so long as they have a plan. And all this is based on traditional bias in favor of moms being the better parent, even though women no longer devote themselves to child rearing. So huge and obvious reasons why that should be rectified and that bias should no longer exist. Now, what, excuse me.
Well, quick question. Are these
Yeah.
actual laws on the books, or is this just sort of a habit of the judiciary?
Well, it's now judge made law. Some of these things have gone all the way up to our Supreme Court. Our Supreme Court has says she needs to have a plan. You know? So, yeah, I mean, it's a bad, I think, decision, but it's the binding law of the land in Canada. It's one of the things that makes it worse. Bear with me, or I should back up a second. What men, being the, well, forgive me, but the reasonable people we tend to be, think should be the law instead, is that there should be shared parenting, roughly 50-50 in terms of time, as the starting point, and then only move off that if there are good reasons, really compelling reasons to so. I mean, that is very moderate especially in light of the circumstances, which are this, that kids do best in a two-parent family. In fact, specifically where the kids are living with their biological mom and dad. Single moms comparatively do badly, do poorly, but single dads do in between those two. In fact, they're closer, as measured by outcomes of kids, to having outcomes as good as a two-parent family. So, if anything, you'd think there would be a bias in favor of custody to men rather than maintaining the old bias against it. There was,
Where can people
sorry,
look into that study? Because I know some people aren't going to believe that, and I don't know myself for sure if that's true or not. But where
yeah,
can they look into that?
that I don't have offhand, but I can find it out, and maybe you could then post it on
Okay.
your. So I will make a note to myself.
What what other issues are there that face men in terms of legal rights?
Well, there are. Well, I guess it's the combination of both the cultural and the legal. A fundamental error that occurred in, from what I can see, when women started to move into the workplace was this. That model was largely based on race. That by making, and rather by making an analogy to race, that say in the States, especially blacks were just black men were discriminated in job employment, and somehow upper middle class white women said, "That's hey, that's just like us," and so that analogy was made, but it's a poor one. One of the most fundamental reasons that it's a poor one is that when it comes to sex as opposed to race, there's two dimensions of life that have to be shared: uh, the productive realm or work realm, and the reproductive realm or family and sexual realm. And the push has been exclusively to get an increase in rights for women that is in the traditional male realm of production and work. And there's been no similar push to get equal rights for men in the family realm. There's probably about 5 dimensions to equality in the family realm that men would have to have, let's say at least within a marriage, if there were to be equal rights between the sexes. One would be equal sexual power. The second would be something in the nature of equal reproductive rights. Pardon me a bit. I think I have a glass of water here. Third and fourth, somewhat combined, would be a right to lifestyle choice and to a right to be supported, which would then flow from women not only not devoting themselves to child rearing, but to being in the workplace full time in traditionally male and high paid jobs like doctor, lawyer, university professor. If you have a job like that, you need to expect to have a husband, a spouse who will be more involved with the kids, not just as a matter of responsibility, but as a matter of rights. And then, of course, the fifth and final one is child custody, which I've already dealt with. One of the most fundamental ones is pretty much anything to do with sex. We've gone from people kind of fumbling through it to no means no. And while no means no sounds legitimate on its face or even necessary, I did stumble across one thing a couple of years ago where high school girls, so not even out of high school yet, under 18, 25% of them admitted that they said no to something sexual when they didn't mean it. And young guys might read the body language and this and that tells them that she's not meaning what she says. And yet, if he acts on that, of course, it's a crime. Now, it's gotten much more extreme than that in Canada. They've moved to affirmative consent of yes means yes. And a lot of women, even some like modern women, don't like to say yes. They would like things to unfold. They might say, oh, they will say no if they don't want something to happen, although there's still the problem. They might say no, even if they do want something to happen, or at least can be persuaded. But but they will at least say no, but they might not say yes. But yet that's now the standard. And then they get more extreme yet. They say, well, it's going to be enthusiastic yes. I can't imagine a guy saying, especially a young guy saying, may I touch your breast? And the woman has to enthusiastically say, yes. Like, I just don't think most women would, and girls would want that.
So this one area you're talking about now is sort of the over legalization without any kind of awareness of cultural or societal norms.
Well, yeah, exactly. And without any sense of like biological norms and how people actually go to bed together. Most people, male or female, don't want a big conversation. They want things to unfold somewhat naturally. So yeah, that's exactly right. And just to finish off the on that point, then the next thing is that even if you get this enthusiastic yes, and it's got to be at every step of the way, by the way, which is even more, seems to me, unobtainable. Uh, then if you somehow get that, the next question is, well, was she drinking? Well, most people drink. In fact, to involve themselves in sex, that's very, very common for people to unwind, to loosen their inhibitions, to do something sexual. When I was young, both guys and girls would drink for the very purpose of loosening our inhibitions with each other. And now that's a crime, but for one sex only. Now, it's not just one drink, of course, but it's really hard to tell when any sort of where any sort of line is. Like the obvious one is someone is passed out drunk, of course, then that's fine. That it should be a crime, but they're not talking about that.
Well, just so people misunderstand in talking about lines, you're not advocating for, I'm not going to say the word because YouTube doesn't
Yes.
rank it highly, but you're not advocating for forced sexual activity.
Oh no, no, of course not. Of course not. I'm just saying that uh, things tend to unfold in a much more natural, holistic, if awkward way
Yeah.
than this artificial, enthusiastic yes, with no alcohol to any extent involved. It just that's just not
There's
how
kind of a dance that
together.
occurs, and like
Exactly.
a no doesn't mean I'm going to ignore that and throw you on the floor and do whatever I want. It means, well, maybe I'm going to push a little bit further and see if that's a real no or a fake no.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then if it turns out to be a real no, then you stop.
Exactly right. And when I was young, at least, there were probably three kinds of no's. I like to say became a connoisseur of no's. And one might be something like, no, you silly boy, silly boy, no, stop, silly boy. And it obviously wasn't meant. It was very playful. Then there would be one that was a little harder to read. It'd be, I don't think so. No, we shouldn't. And that was an, oh, okay, do I back off like for a while? Do I back off completely? Do I try again? No. Do I try again in a while? Um, but what I found is that if you tried again and she was actually interested, then things would just unfold. But if she wasn't interested, you would get a no. Like it would be sharp. It would be, I would jump sometimes. It was almost harsh, but that was fair enough because, like, since you had girls and women who were going to say no, whether it's no, maybe, or yes, the no's that mean no kind of like they had to sound
Yeah.
firm. And that I think was fair on both sides, but that's not how things are now. Now it's gotten worse yet in that in Canada for sure, and in the States to some extent at least, they're closing off avenues of defense. So one guy, well, there's a famous Jian Ghomeshi case where a group of women said they had been basically raped by him and that he had treated them very roughly. And apparently he did like rough sex, doing things like choking, but they all came to court and said that's what happened. They were asked, well, did you ever communicate with him again? Oh, no, it was just too awful. It was too traumatic. So you didn't want a relationship with him. Like after that, oh, no, 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 they all said. And what came out is that they had, well, conspired with each other to coordinate their stories. And I think all three, maybe two out of three, but I think all three were lying. One had sent him flowers after the first date. Another had written a text rather that said, or an email. It might have been in the days before text. I love your hands. And a third had sent him a fairly provocative bikini photo. And it was clear that all three were interested in a further relationship with him. And he got acquitted. And the government's response to that was to say that things like the texts, the photographs, are part of the, or rather, can only be disclosed, can only be used as a defense if they're disclosed ahead of time by the defense with the approval of a judge. And so that allows people to adjust their stories. Well, it allows women to adjust their stories. There was one other case where there was a guy
So are you
who,
saying the guy couldn't defend himself and use the evidence that proved that the women were still interested in after whatever had gone on between them?
exactly, unless it got approved by a judge ahead of time. And now where the problem with that comes in, bad enough, because then you don't see that they were prepared to lie. But then the next step was acceptance of the belief that a rape victim doesn't have to desire to have no contact with her rapist. So a woman could pursue a relationship with a man, and some have, for up to 10 years or so after they were raped and had further sexual encounters, maybe an off and on relationship, and then one day decide, well, the first time it was rape. And if you point out how their behavior for a month, a year, a decade after that was inconsistent with being a rape victim, they say that there's no way to predict how a rape victim will react. So they might actually try to have sex with their rapist in order
Well, it
to
sounds like there's just
realize that.
no evidence needed in these cases because there won't be any physical evidence it's just somebody's word that you did that to me.
You can pretty much describe it as the accusation is the conviction. It's not much better than that at all. There was,
At least in some cases, right? Maybe not.
yeah, there are still some acquittals, but it's almost like guilty till proven innocent once there's an accusation, and the avenues to proving one's innocence are being shut down more and more. So one other example is this young woman sent a,
Well, before we get into more examples, I want to sort of outline just some of the bullet points of the issues,
sure,
if that's okay.
absolutely.
So what other things are there? If we could go through them,
Oh,
relatively quickly of
sure. Well, that's actually roughly where I was going to go. There's another case where a girl, again, young woman sent a grad student. I think he was assisting in a course as grad students often do. Come to the bar for a drink, and then we'll have hot sex. So he went to the bar. They had a drink and then had hot sex, and she said she was raped. Um, the only thing to her credit on that one is she did at least do it the next morning. It wasn't like a year or a decade afterwards, but like still. And now the rule on that would be that that evidence can only come in, that even that she invited him to go have hot sex, to come and have hot sex, wait for it, based on her prior sexual history being irrelevant. So the invitation to come have hot sex isn't considered part of that event. It's considered her prior sexual history
That's
and could
pretty
only be,
wild. But
yeah,
I,
it's,
but what I meant separate men's rights issues. So
oh yeah, sure.
we've covered the disparity in custody. We've covered the legal defense against sexual assault and worse charges that men aren't legally able to defend themselves, at least in some cases, properly. What other sort of legal issues do men face?
Well, there's a bunch of things in the workplace. There is well, a bias against hiring or promoting men, at least or especially white men, in the workplace, and that's been made to sound less discriminatory or non-discriminatory somehow, magically, by calling it affirmative action, or now being called diversity. So you can be the best person for a job, and you might not get it because you're a man. Same thing for a promotion. But yet, and of course, all that's like pretty horrible stuff. That's basic, not to have your sex or race held against you. But worse, remember, this is in the context of women who become doctors, lawyers, university professors, etc., professional jobs that were traditionally male, not giving up their desire for a man who makes even more than they do and is the primary breadwinner. So that just puts men in an absolute squeeze. That's basically a no-win situation for many, many men.
Well, so that gets more into the cultural issues. I guess let's explore some of
Well,
those.
that's where the cultural and the legal intersect. Bad enough, in fact, horrific to have your sex held against you in job hiring or promotion. Worse yet, if it makes you unmarriageable.
Yeah.
One other
So
really big,
basically, to recap part of what you were saying there, it's
sure,
like if women want to marry doctors, but women are now 50% of the doctor positions, there's less doctors for women to marry. Sort of
yes,
maybe an oversimplification of it, but
Yeah. In fact, what's happened is I think in both med school and law school, I think pretty much everywhere in the West, certainly in Canada, I believe Britain, yeah, Britain for sure, Canada for sure, Australia for sure, and I think the States, although I'm not quite so sure on that one, for years and years now in law school and med school, 60% of the graduates are female. So it becomes even more of an imbalance. So even if every male doctor married a female doctor, which wouldn't be the case because you'd think some male doctors that might have a pre-existing relationship, maybe with a nurse or whatever, or somebody else. But even if they did, there'd still be 20 women who couldn't marry a doctor. Some women will marry down, but I did see, now this is nothing more than a YouTube video, but I did see one YouTube video where they're talking about having discussions with female doctors in Australia, in this case, about this point that at least 20 females out of 100 will be short a marriage partner if they keep that standard. And the attitude apparently was, I will be in the group that does get a male doctor, or else I'll just stay single. So that's pretty extreme. There's certainly almost a kind of economic or financial objectification to it, I would say, which is really bad. Uh, so that's another whole set of problems, increasing the demand for men to be what sometimes is pejoratively referred to as being a success object, kind of to match the fact that women have complained about being sex objects. So it really shows the extent to which men are success objects, even once there's no more need for it because the woman's a doctor herself, or it's impossible for the men to meet that standard because 60% of the doctors are female.
So on the cultural side, this is sort of like women or feminism or women's liberation, like women's options and opportunities in life kind of got opened up. But
Yes,
the point you're making is that men's options didn't get opened up, at least just culturally speaking about for right now. That men are still kind of expected to be in this certain framework or range of being.
exactly right. And as I pointed out earlier, there's, unlike with race, where the real issue is like the productive realm, with sex, the issues are both the productive realm and the reproductive realm, both work and family. There's a whole another dimension too, and that is that what I would describe as classic rights carry with them responsibilities. So to get paid for a job, you have to do the job, that kind of thing. And but what's happened is that the push has been for women's rights, but not for commensurate responsibilities. Once you're a doctor, you can't. If you're a female doctor, well, male for that matter, but men never did this. If you're a doctor, male or female, you kind of need to be willing to marry down from that because especially if you're female, there's not going to be enough men to go around. Plus, the need for it has dissipated. You can earn your own income. You really need to take the responsibility and be the expect to be the primary income earner in that family. But it gets worse than that, not for men so much, but for society. One of the things that tends to happen if a male and female doctor marry, the woman usually moves to part-time work. Lots of male doctors work 60-hour a week. Most female doctors with kids, at least when they're young, or well, for sure before they're in school, but even I'd say probably until they're in college at least, only want to work 2 or 3 days a week. And part of the healthcare crisis is that 60% of the doctors are women, and the ones that are married with kids mostly want to work part-time. So horrible impact on society that way. That's even beyond men's rights.
Well, what's the solution there? I mean, should we just go back to traditionalism and women need to stay in the home, or is there some other way forward?
Yeah, there is some other way forward. Uh, I'm really torn on it, just by the way. Traditionalism has some positives. The main thing about it is that if you have kids, uh, and say if a person is either, let's say the man and is either a professional or maybe has a trade where there's, demands to work overtime. Uh, that's a full-time plus job. Raising kids is a full-time plus job. So the big advantage of traditionalism is you have two people and two full-time plus jobs. So there's a lot of work there, but at least the amount of work matches the number of people. Once women go full-time into the workplace, uh, especially if they want to be a professional, but even otherwise, you now have three full-time, or if the woman's a professional, full-time plus jobs between two people. So there's a mismatch there. And the way it's been solved is to have, even at a very young age, the crucial formative years, have kids in daycare. In other words, substantially raised by someone who's paid to love them, rather than primarily raised by someone who loves them, that is a parent. And so that's the big upside, one big upside of traditionalism, and a big downside to modernism. Uh, so in the first place, there's two full-time plus jobs and two people. In the second case, there's three full-time plus jobs, still only two people, and kids get shortchanged. So that's a horrible problem with modernism. Associated with that problem, of course, is this whole notion of women wanting to marry up. So it's not like they would support a man to be at home in most cases for the crucial years, and then he could have the lifestyle choice to work full time or part
I mean,
time
some women might be okay
as the
with that,
kid
but
gets older.
generally speaking,
Exactly
it's
right.
not the inclination.
Exactly. Exactly right. There's nothing resembling equality on that. Exactly. So those are the upsides to traditionalism. Having said that, and that huge downside to modernism, the kids get substantially raised by strangers, and women are in traditionally male professions, but still want to marry up. On the other hand, the upside of modernism is that, unlike back in the day, you don't need 9 kids to survive, or in order to survive from generation to generation. We aren't all out on farms or even further back in hunting and gathering society. So
And
you don't
children
have
aren't dying as high rates in childbirth or at a young age because men are
exactly,
much
you
better.
used to have nine, and maybe six would live, and you'd need all six of those to run the farm. That's not the case anymore. And as which is, a lot of ways great. I mean, even just in the time that I've been aware of the issue, so that would be from my early 20s to now. I just turned 70, so that would be 45 to 50 years. The replacement rate for couples has gone from 2.3 kids per couple to 2.1. So there's been a huge improvement even in the modern era, and like that's way better than 6 or 7 out of 9 would survive. So you need fewer kids, and lifespans have increased. So if women don't do more outside the home, then sort of there's a valid issue. What are they going to do with the rest of their life once the two or three kids are are raised? The other thing that's a factor, and it's less valid than that point, but it's got an element of validity. The nature of work has changed from being very physical and dangerous, almost universally, excuse me, to being more office work. So a woman can be outside the home and still be safe, like as opposed to doing something dangerous in the woods or whatever. Like that would have been the case back in hunting and gathering days, or having to do something heavy on the farm that they didn't have the upper body strength for, or some dangerous piece of equipment that could harm them. Those aren't just the jobs that are available now. So one can see where there would be a lot of appeal for that. So, notwithstanding the fact that I really, really, really don't like trying to jam three full-time plus jobs into two people, that's kind of where we are. And it does have some upsides. But the things that have to be addressed are amongst the things that I've mentioned. Highly successful professional women need to give up their desire to marry a man who's more than them. And one other way this problem can be described is it's like, in effect, women have been given a double share of rights. Back in the day, I don't know if you could call it a right, but let's say it was a right that men sort of had the workplace. That was their realm or domain or sphere, and women had the family. Now that women have moved into the workplace in huge numbers, they haven't given up their traditional rights, given up in the sense like that they have to be shared. So there's no well, I guess the first one is that, as we've gone over, might be a doctor, doesn't mean they want to be the primary income earner. I'm not prepared to give up things like to equalize lifestyle choice, which is a related issue, aren't prepared to have custodial equality. So they want all those, or they
So it's
have
not really a
the
double helping of rights. It's more like rights without the responsibilities that should come with that right.
It's both. Yeah, it's both because what happens is if women were expected to have responsibility equal to rights, they'd be working 10 in professional jobs, 10, maybe 12 hours a day at work, and they'd be involved with the kids 12, 14 hours a day. So that's literally impossible. So what happens instead is the responsibility in home gets slashed so that the daycare center does a big chunk of it, and the dad shares the rest with the mom, not not equally enough to satisfy most women, but he does share that burden. But she still keeps the rights. The lowered responsibility for women slops over into the workplace as well. If you what happens with and I worked in a professional office, so I saw it. What happens with professional females is they often, if they choose not to, I mean, provided they have kids, don't have to work the extra long hours, don't have to work the grind. They get accommodated. Um, they so they can work. If someone has to take the kid to the doctor, it's assumed it'll be the mom, but at least in a professional office, most women, they don't get docked for those hours if of pay. If they don't work the grind hours. Back in my office, we had probably half a dozen people. It's a bit of Jordan Peterson's uh, Pareto concept. Probably about 20% of the lawyers there did more than half the work. There were a few workhorses, absolute workhorses, and those guys, and one woman throughout her career, she had no kids, and one until she became a mom, were the ones who did it. All the rest were guys. If you can go home early rather than have to stay an extra 2, 4, 6 hours in an evening or in a day, there's no equal responsibility there at all.
Hmm.
And then, and not only do they get the same pay for that, if you say, well, you're less committed to your job because you're not working their grind hours, they will say misogyny, oppressive patriarchy. I'm just as committed to my job. And so they still want to be promoted based on affirmative action or whatever ahead of those guys and one or two gals who work the grind hours, even though they've contributed much less to the office.
Yeah, so I mean that's a number of the issues laid out. I know there's a bunch of other ones, but I think people might be interested in your story. How did you come to get involved in men's rights issues? I mean, it seems like you were sort of way ahead of the curve with most people, the relatively small number that have gotten interested or on board with this sort of activity.
Yeah, I was an early adapter. If I might, I'll just mention one last thing about the workplace briefly. Um, Sexual misbehavior in the office. We leave out sexual exploitation by females. If a female is harassed into sex for a promotion or to keep a job or whatever, that's awful. But what we leave out is women exploiting their sexuality for advantage, either to cry so they don't get as harsh a punishment if they screwed up, or to be flirtatious, or even sexual to gain better work or an advancement. It's not just one or the other that's ought to be examined. It's both. In terms of me, yeah, as a bit of a story here, I'll try to keep it brief because it was a long journey. Uh, I was always a nice guy, and
Real nice Canadian guy, eh? Don't mean to offend you, eh? You know?
yeah, exactly. So I went to university straight out of high school. That was in 1971, and feminism was kind of starting to get going up here. And I was part of this group, and well, not just a group, but started to hear about feminism. And so I heard women say, why can't men do stuff with kids and why can't women be in the workplace more? And that made at least some sense to me. But the one that really resonated was when they criticized men who were macho. And as a nice guy, that just struck home with me because I would see guys who would, kind of walk around like this, bark at everybody, interrupt people constantly, never listen, never apologize, never admit they were wrong. And I thought,
Yeah, I've met
oh,
a few people like that.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. I thought, oh, women don't like that. That's great. So I thought I'm on board.
So you
Uh,
were a feminist back in the day.
Yeah, I was a male feminist from, let's say, beginning of the second term of first half university. So roughly January 72. Lasted for, I lost track a little bit, but about a year and a half. So even if we round it off to 2 years, that would be, I was out of it by end of 73, or let's say 74. So it's coming 50 years now. The reason I got out of it is that once they wanted to expand the conversation. This is, I guess it'd be feminists, I'd have to say. Once they wanted to expand the conversation to beyond female equal rights in the workplace, or equal rights as they described it, I thought the next obvious thing would be equal child custody. Again, for all the reasons we gave earlier. If you're working, you're not going to be at home, no reason to have a pro-mother bias. Well, instead of that, they went to abortion rights. And I'm going like, WTF, that shouldn't be the next thing on the agenda. It should be child custody. And in conjunction with that failure, I started to notice they weren't just opposed to like macho guys. There was a general animus. I would have to say, looking back, there was a hatred. It was hate based. And then the final thing, and this just drove me mental, uh, they said they hated those, that these macho guys were oppressive and they're awful, which I agreed. But those are the guys they went to bed with. So I'm thinking, that dog don't hunt. This don't make sense. That don't make no, never mind. So I'm thinking, no, there's something wrong with this. And amongst those things, on even worse today, are the things that persist today. So let's say by end of 73, or to round it off, let's say beginning of 74, because by then I was out for sure. I was out and started to see all the flaws. I read a book in 1974 or 5 called The Hazards of Being Male, Surviving the Myth of Masculine Privilege by a fellow by the name of Herb Goldberg, and that opened my eyes a fair amount. And then as time went on and things got more and more and more extreme, it sort of became more and more obvious. Um, got a bit of a reputation when I got into law school, even by first year university. There was a guy in first year who was dating a girl in first year, but he was a pretty open-minded guy. And I think he had sided with his girlfriend, who was very feminist. And he asked me about my views. So this would have been in, pardon me, well, first year law was 78 or 79. So let's say by 79's, 44, maybe 45 years ago. He asked me my views and he listened to them. And he said, oh, he says, I see your problem. You're 10 years ahead of the times. Well, that was 45 years ago. And I'd say, if anything, things have gotten worse for men, not better. But we certainly haven't made the progress that we need to match the gains that women have made in our areas of disadvantage. So there was all that. The personal impact it had on me is that I became kind of anti-marriage for myself. I guess that would be maybe a bit of a MGTOW dimension, but it's the marital laws got worse and worse and worse and worse in terms of property on divorce, and the amount of maintenance that was expected, and so on, and all this stuff with
Needing alimony.
yeah, exactly, yeah, all that. I thought, no, this isn't a takeable deal. So I made a point in my entire life. I've neither been married nor cohabited, and I felt that was the way I had to go. So yeah, so that's the impact that it had on me as time went by. Oh, I guess a major point for me, and it's part of what we're discussing today. My best course, my highest grade in law school, believe it or not, was jurisprudence, legal philosophy,
Mm.
and I had a bit of a knack for it, if one can have a knack for such a thing. And what I did in the main paper for that course was to develop kind of my own little legal theory about how rights work generally, and specifically how they apply between the sexes. And I call it classic rights. Fundamental rights are things like in the Constitution, right against search and seizure by the government, right against arbitrary detention. You need due process, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, like all that stuff. But classic rights are the ones that I was describing earlier, where to get paid for a job, you actually have to do the job. So classic rights are rights that come with responsibilities.
Mhm.
And I agree with Jordan Peterson on this, although there's lots I don't agree with him on, and that is the responsibility. Well, it's the at one level, it's simply the other side of the coin as a right. The responsibility usually comes slightly ahead of the right, in that you do the job and then you get paid. Like they don't pay you, you don't start a job, they'll pay you for the next 2 weeks and then you show up. You do your 2 weeks and then they pay you. So you're earning the money as you go. So the right is accruing, but you don't get paid until the end of some time period. And excuse me, and a lot of that like has been lost. Instead, what seems to have happened, it's when it comes to females in the workplace, it's all say in especially when it gets to things like uh, equal numbers. It's almost more like a constitutional fundamental right, like that they have kind of a right to have half of the best jobs rather than it has to be earned through uh,
Mhm.
taking responsibility.
So that's sort of how you got here. I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's more to it, but why? I guess my question to you um, is why this is such a focus for you and why you think it should be a focus, presumably for other people. Because as you pointed out, women still have some problems that are unique to women these days, even if maybe they've sort of shifted in what some of them are. And there's other groups of people, like, certain minorities that have problems they're dealing with. Why do you and why should, you know, Joe, somebody else, uh, be concerned with men's rights? Why are these so important, these kind of issues, as opposed to the rights of women or, maybe different other groups of people?
Right. Paul Elam, formerly of A Voice for Men regarding men, and now the XY crew used to say, maybe still does, the men's rights are human rights or they're human rights too. I think that to the extent we reasonably can, everybody's issues should be addressed. I wouldn't say address men's issues at the expense of, say, minorities. Don't address them at the expense of women, although women are at least 50 years ahead of us in having equality with us. We don't really have a concept of equality for men, and therefore we don't really have a concept of equality between the sexes. Rather, we have something that's quite different. But like I said, with the example of sexual exploitation by women in the workplace, that shouldn't be instead of sexual harassment. It should be in addition to sexual harassment. One is just more likely to uh, have the woman as the perpetrator and the other, the woman, as the victim, but they're both valid issues.
You mentioned MGTOW earlier. So
Yes,
for people that don't know, there's some sort of other stuff that's related to or maybe adjacent to the men's rights issues or men's rights movement. So can you walk us through what the difference is between that? So some things would be the red pill, MGTOW, pickup artists, and the manosphere. What's your understanding of those terms and how are they
sure.
interconnected or different from the men's rights movement?
Sure. The What's known as the manosphere is three areas that primarily affect men. That would be the men's rights advocates or the men's rights movement. As I say, not that there is much of a movement, but men's rights advocates, PUAs, pickup artists, and then the third one is MGTOW, which stands for men going their own way. What the MGTOW guys say is that relations between the sexes have become so one-sided, so unbalanced, so unreasonable for men that the only, well, certainly safe, but the only reasonable course of action is to avoid, at minimum, well, you avoid legal relationships with women. And the way you do that in most places is you, at the very least, you don't get married. In every province in Canada and a number of states in the States, it doesn't mean, it means you also avoid cohabitation because a woman can get access to property or financial support rights that way. In theory, it's the other way around but, as well, but that's, in theory. In practice, it's overwhelmingly men having to pay women. And then also a way to avoid legal relations is to not have a child with a woman. So I didn't follow that one, by the way. I do have one son. The excuse me. So the men going their own way say it's so dangerous and unreasonable to get into any legal relationship with women that you avoid marriage or cohabitation. Now, there's a bunch of what are called levels to MGTOW, and there's not a lot of consistency. They're defined different ways, but I can tell you more or less, at least roughly, what they're about. A level one is the one I just described. You avoid legal relationships, but you'd still date if you wanted to and even have a long-term relationship, but maintaining separate residences and you don't mix finances. Level two would be to date at most short term, so you don't even go long term. And level three is where you won't have an intimate connection with a female at all. And some of those guys, or maybe this would be level four, well, it might be part of level three, minimize interaction with women altogether, whether it's buying a coffee or at work or whatever. So, that's starting to get a little more extreme. And then there's even some guys that think, this whole society is so, they would say, so poisoned that, if you can, to the extent you can detach yourself from society overall, so much the better. You're not going to get hired for a good job. You're not going to get promoted. So just make as minimal contribution as you can. There are other guys who would say, no, that's not the best way to do. What you do is you focus on yourself and you become as fit as you can in terms of exercise, as healthy as you can in terms of food. You get your money in order, you work hard, you save your money, and you lead a really good life, whether that's to go on a lot of trips or buy a number of cars or retire early or whatever it is. You do that instead of having a wife of kids or kids, a wife and kids, because if you do that, you're still living a healthy life. You're not a stone slacker in your mom's basement, but you're avoiding most of these pitfalls to the extent one reasonably can. So that's MGTOW. The PUA's pickup artists, they're considered part of the manosphere as well, although there tends to be some conflict between all three groups. I would say the pickup artists, a lot of men's rights guys don't really like them because, well, one reason, or maybe for a couple reasons. One would be sort of fits the stereotype of just, exploiting females. You pick them up, pump them and dump them, right?
Mhm.
Uh, on the other hand, one could say in those guys' defense that it's women who created the pickup culture and women who are maintaining it. It's mostly girls that don't want boyfriends these days rather than boys not wanting uh, girlfriends. Although things have gotten so bad that now something like 63% of guys under of rather single guys under 30 or 35, one or the other. I think this was out of the States, haven't had a date or sex in at least a year.
I
And
heard I've heard that statistic, but I also heard a newer one that that study was from like 2 years ago, but then like a year later it actually um
did it bounce back?
yeah, it bounced back or something. So I
That
mean,
might have been,
I don't have
yeah,
this study myself, but
that might have been right in the middle of COVID. So that might have been a really low point.
mm,
But I think there are guys who are saying it's really not worth it. Well, let's just have a look at it from their perspective. Any approach might be considered sexual harassment. Any touch might be considered sexual assault. Any intercourse might be considered rape, even 10 years after the fact. And even if you've had an intimate relationship ongoing for some of those years. And guys are thinking, this is insane. I don't need that. This is beyond absurd. This is like this is dystopic. So there is that. I would say both the MGTOW and MRA guys would say that the PUAs are still kind of being too gynocentric and that everything is kind of focused on females. Uh, the conflict between MRAs and MGTOW, to my mind, doesn't have to exist. But what it is I think, as I understand it, the um, MGTOW guys say, look, we're not going to win any rights battle. There's no way uh, that women are ever going to give up anything. So you're wasting your time, you're wasting your energy, you're wasting your breath, you're wasting your, to use a current phrase, emotional labor. Walk away and do something useful, like focus on yourself. And the MRA types say something more like, well, we have to try. Like, say, in my case, I always felt a responsibility to the next generation. I wanted to leave the world a better place for the next generation. And when I was young, I'm of course a boomer. When I was young, that's the way it was going. And then we got T-boned by a whole bunch of things, by feminism, by Vietnam War, by absolutely everything. And I think we're leaving the world in a mess. I think this rising generation is pretty much the first that are going to be less well off than their parents. A lot of young people have given up the hope of ever um, owning a home. Excuse me. And we are not a functional society the way we are. With this with this primary focus on dual employment or dual incomeism, one might describe it like it's so obvious now in hindsight, but no one thought of it at the time, and a lot of people are still blind to it now. And that is this: if you have two people focusing on work rather than kids, how many kids do you think you'll have? And we are not at replacement rate in terms of children, which is, as I mentioned earlier, 2.1. I think we're down to like maybe somewhere between 1.5 and 1.8. It's preposterous for a prosperous society not be able to produce replacement level kids. We can always have some immigration, that's fine up to a point, but you should, if you're not uh, fulfilling the basis of human existence, which is arrival and survival, production and reproduction, you're not a functional society. If you don't produce enough to survive, you'll lose your society. If you don't reproduce enough to survive, you will lose your society. And we are not reproducing enough to survive. So anyway, that's why one more of the reasons I became and an MRA myself personally. Oh, and then some of the MRA guys did call MGTOW names, and that did not go over well at all. That really furthered the divide. I don't think there does have to be a conflict between the two. Like I would see myself as a bit of both, and there's no conflict between that at all. As I say, I've never married or cohabited. I did have a child who was a a blessing, but I can, for the most part, avoid legal entanglements with women and still do some advocacy work on behalf of men.
So just to clarify, you said at a certain point that the country or society was T-boned by feminism. Uh,
Yes.
what you touched on maybe a little bit of the problems earlier, but what did you mean by that? I mean, I don't want to go
Oh,
to a huge deep dive on
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, okay. We were moving towards, I think, a society in which workers, the working class, was getting more. In fact, I had a buddy who was in the uh, um, brewing industry at an executive level, and the line workers there were making enough money. This goes back to the 70s. They'd have a house, a car, uh, either a boat or a cabin, 3 or 4 kids. Wife didn't have to work, or maybe work part time. And they were doing well enough that the next big push was going to be for more time off. So get the same amount of money, but in fewer hours. During one of the unemployment bulges, the post office here in Canada tried to negotiate that. Their slogan was 40 for 30, which was 40 hours of paid work for only doing 30 hours of work. But the thing is, with automation and that, there were savings being made. So the idea was spread some of that around
Mhm.
and also give jobs to the next generation. But instead of moving to a less work obsessed in the case of professionals, or less work required in the case of people, say, with factory jobs, when feminism came along, it started to glorify work. And work was the end all and pay all, even over raising your own kids, or to some extent, even over having kids. And now what we've landed on, where you almost need 2 incomes to have a good standard of living. So we've gone from having a good standard of living on one income, and with the prospect that work hours were going to be reduced without um, having to lose any pay, to the point where we've got 2 people working full-time or full-time plus and having trouble making ends meet. And also those early that early push, that kind of thing, men and women were on the same side because uh, women wanted their husbands home more just because they loved them or because they can do more with the kids
Oh, some
or
women,
because
right?
travel.
Some women wanted their husbands somewhere. Some did.
Yeah, yeah. Back in the day, I would say most, but you're right, not all, not all. And now, we're horribly divided. I mean, I mean, some of the accusations that have been hurled at men, like toxic masculinity, which is a kind of a horrific one, because much like the old guys used to call macho, that is toxic.
The
But like
Gaston type characters.
yeah, but like anything, like any sharp knife, it's going to be a two-edged sword. And like anything, it can use, or almost anything can be used for good or bad.
Mhm.
And positive masculinity is what's built the world, frankly. So to get rid of masculinity completely is absurd. Plus, women tend to find unmasculine men not even remotely sexually attractive. So all kinds of
Did you
crazy
say
problems.
women find masculine men not remotely sexually attractive?
Unmasculine,
Unmasculine. Okay.
yeah, feminized men. And so that's those are huge problems right there. And then the next huge divide, the one that just boggles my mind, is to suggest that any country in the West is overall a rape culture. That's just a vile accusation. It's not true. There might be little elements here and there. Biker gangs might well be a rape culture, maybe,
Let's not
maybe.
use that word too much. If you could say
Oh,
grape.
yes, yes, okay, yes, yes.
If you say the word grape, that'll probably be better for the
Grape, yes, a grape culture because grapes are bitter and they should be. Um, so uh, yeah, so there's these horrible accusations that just have divided us horribly, and not only that, they're mostly not true. I'll just go off into that for 1 second, if I might. When I was young, girls wanted to be able to have sex and not be thought of as sleazy, the S word. So if you like had a boyfriend for a while, then the relationship might or would become sexual. Okay, fair enough. But then it went to, well, we want to sleep around and not be considered sleazy. And then it went to, we females want to sleep around, but you guys are using us. And then it went to, you guys, we want to sleep around, and you guys aren't just using us, you're raping us. And then it went from that to rape culture. So you have the same behavior, and it's gone from being, we don't want to be called sleazy, to you're a rapist.
a grapist.
A grapist, pardon me, a grapist. Forgive me, I forget the
I mean,
rules
it
of.
really is ridiculous that, we can't have an adult conversation without having to censor certain words.
Yes, yes. But anyway, so we've gone from, I think, doing things that would have been in the common good to things that are horribly divisive and aren't even true. And and I think that did come out of one particular movement more than I wouldn't say more than anywhere else, but it was the tip of the spear, at least. Let's put it that way.
Well, thanks for coming on, Don. I've got one final question and sort of maybe a
Sure.
subsequent question for you. Um, Part of what I'm going for on this channel is to see sort of the interconnection between the mundane world and the spiritual world. And so,
Yes.
do you view this as in any way a spiritual issue, or put another way, how does spirituality intersect with these things we've been talking about?
I have come to view it as a spiritual issue. I don't know if I can articulate it very well, but I will have a go at it. Um, One way is this. I will tell you the three scariest things I've ever done in my life. One is to jump out of a small airplane, parachute jumping. I only did a few of them, and they were all static line. not free fall. Static line means they open your chute from you from a wire that's tied to the plane. But that's the third scariest thing I did. The second scariest thing I did was to do a bit of public, semi-public speaking, like interviews like this, even though I have a stutter. Ask any stutterer, it's one of the worst things in the world in our minds. And the very scariest thing I ever did was to stand up to women and their stated interests. And so I found to do that, I needed to find some courage. And finding some courage is a bit of a spiritual quest. Having a sense of duty to the next generation seems to me, a moral dimension that also has a dimension of spirituality to it. In the group regarding men, now the XY crew, I have noticed that pretty much everyone in that group, virtually everyone, has moved in a direction of spirituality compared to where they started. And I think it's a part of this whole thing that it's something that's greater than us that we want to be part of, but it's also something that needs us. If men don't protect little boys, especially, or the next generation of young men, starting from the time they're small boys, nobody will. It's us or it's nobody. And I feel a sense of duty towards them, although I know there's some risk, not so much now that I'm retired, but at the very least, get a lot of hate. If you're known, I mean, I got a bad reputation in my workplace because I tried some of this stuff there. For years, I thought, I'm just not explaining it clearly enough. And I realized, no, nobody wants to hear it. And so, yeah, I think a spiritual dimension either is an outgrowth of this or work, or that it's required for this work, or there might be some kind of positive cycle
Well,
where,
it sounds like, people that are motivated, like you said, for looking out for the next generation, and not in this kind of supremacist way of men being above women and lording over them, but a kind of like real equality that actually works, considering sex differences and so on. But
yes,
it's ultimately from a place of love or regard for all of humanity, which is a fundamentally spiritual thing, or spiritual
yes.
motivation.
And do you know what I found? I found as that's developed more and more that I've come to pretty much like not hate anybody. I mean, even someone that I would consider anti-male sexist, like I don't hate them. I think they're wrong, profoundly wrong. I think they're doing a lot of harm. I think they're misguided, might have all kinds of flaws, but I don't hate them.
That's good. That's a really good attitude, because that's a lot of the division today, is that people, hate might be too strong of a word, but people can get really angry at just sort of honest disagreements.
Yes,
Like, oh, you're on this side and I'm on this side. And, if you can get some of that emotion out of it and just sort of be willing to listen to what the other person has to say, and then maybe have a sort of logical interchange, rational interchange on it, maybe a lot of these bridges that kind of exist now can be healed. But you have to let go of some of the anger and emotion about these divides in ideology or outlook, or maybe just labels.
yes.
So my final question to you, Don, is, I ask this question at the end of every interview, and it doesn't, don't try to pigeonhole this into a men's rights thing, just whatever
Sure.
comes to you. What message do you have for the audience? Tune into your intuition and
Oh, okay.
see what message you have to share for the audience today.
Okay. Hmm. maybe twofold. One is to be cognizant of the clear connection between rights and responsibilities. They should never be, at least in ordinary life, should never be segmented from each other. And the other is something I learned from a friend of mine who actually is an Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is this: no matter what horrible thing one feels has been done to you, to one, always ask the question, what role did I play in this? Because if there's even 1% responsibility there, one can work that 1% to eventually help get out of the problem. Just a small example, this, if one hangs out with a bad crowd and the next, but it's fun, and the next thing you know, someone's been slipping something into the drugs or your drink or whatever that makes you an addict because it was all a ploy to get you addicted, so you'd have to spend lots of money on drugs. Well, you didn't take those on purpose, but one obvious, so in that sense, you have 0% responsibility, except now you're an addict. So in the short term, one would say, pardon me, I became an addict against my will. They slipped me the drugs, but now I am an addict. And the only way I will get to a normal life is if I deal with my addiction. So I've got to take some element of responsibility for that, even though it's not my fault in a sense at all. At the next level, one would say, yeah, the fact I hung out with a bunch of bad guys and I knew they were bad guys, they were just a lot of fun to party with. 1%, 10% responsibility, something of that nature. So learn not to hang out with guys like that anymore. They're not good for you.
Thanks, Don. That was for some real sage advice there, I'd say.
Well, thanks so much.
And yeah, thanks everybody for watching. And for those of you who made it this far, if you liked the video, please leave a like on it. Subscribe and hit the notification bell if you'd like more of this. Don, where can people find you, or is there anything you want to promote or resources you'd like to share?
I guess the place I would promote the most, since we kind of don't really have much of a movement, would be Paul Elam's XY crew. It's on Subscribestar. What we more do there is help guys with individual issues. One of the big ones is guys who are going through a divorce and the wife's taken off with the kids, being denied access, or subject to a false allegation. So we help guys get through that just through talking. We have fairly radical accountability, so that helps there. Because then again, when one takes responsibility, one can often change things and get to a right. So I'd say the XY crew. If anybody wants to email me for whatever reason, that's fine. They can get a hold of you, Joshua, and you can give them my email address. I have no problem with that. I hope
I don't want to post it publicly, so I'll people can get in touch with you if they leave a comment and want to do so. We'll figure.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
But yeah, I'll put a link to the XY crew either in the pinned comment or the description.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks a lot, Don. And till next time, light and love, everyone.
Thank you, Joshua. It's been a pleasure as always. Bye for now.
Thank you.